Welcome to Shadows at Dusk. Dusk is not the end. It's the doorway between two worlds. A place where stories slip through, quiet, cold, and true. You've entered that space now, and what follows is meant for you. Stay in the shadow. The heart of my modest campfire pulsed its last orange sigh at 17 minutes past 2 in the morning. I consulted my watch, etching the time into memory, because precisely then the world tilted off its axis. The familiar nocturne of the Cascades, the stridulation of crickets, the spectral query of an owl, the furtive scurryings in the leaf litter, all ceased, utterly. The silence crashed down, a physical weight pressing the air from my lungs. 3 days Elias had spent communing with solitude, deep in this wilderness, 15 arduous miles from pavement or signal. A test of mettle, this pilgrimage into isolation. My sanctuary, a diminutive clearing hemmed by colossal pines, their spires scraping the star-dusted canvas above and dense and clutching undergrowth. My tent huddled near the clearing's edge, its back braced against a precipitous tumble of rock. Though embers still glowed like drowsy eyes, the surrounding woods were tomb still. My own breath plumed unseen in the mountain's frigid exhalation. Against the chill, a rivulet of sweat traced a path down my neck. Something felt intrinsically, dreadfully awry. The first footfall landed heavy behind my tent, a distinct, deliberate crunch of detritus under immense weight. Another followed, and another. Whatever moved did so with ponderous rhythm, too substantial for deer, too measured for bear. It possessed the cadence of a walker, yet warped, the stride impossibly vast. Transfixed beside the expiring coals, my fingers spasmed around the haft of my hunting knife. The steps traced a circuit around my camp, prowling the threshold where firelight surrendered to shadow. I swiveled my head, a slow, agonizing pivot tracking the sound. Nothing but impenetrable darkness gaped between the sentinel trees. The pacing halted directly behind my seated form. I held my breath, counting the frantic beats of my heart against the silence. 10 seconds stretched taut, then 20, 30. Movement resumed, completing the circumvention. Twice it orbited my fragile island of light while I remained locked in paralysis. My tent, a mere 15 feet distant, held my rifle, my torch. Logic screamed, run, seize them. But my legs were leaden anchors, my body a statue carved from fear. On the third revolution, the trajectory altered. The steps veered inward, crunching leaves now just scant feet beyond my back. Still, the night yielded no shape, only that implacable heavy tread. A surge of adrenaline finally shattered the paralysis. I hurled myself forward, rolling clear of the unseen proximity, scrambling upright. A desperate sprint carried me to the tent. I practically tore through the zippered ingress. Hands trembling violently, I fumbled for the rifle, the flashlight. The footsteps pursued, halting just outside the thin fabric wall. The nylon membrane bulged inward, a distinct pressure, as if something immense leaned against it. I leveled the rifle at the distended shape, the safety clicking off with metallic finality. The pressure vanished. The steps receded several yards. Who's there? My voice fractured, a stranger's sound in my own throat. Armed, show yourself. Silence answered, profound and mocking. Then the footsteps recommenced their patrol, now circling the tent itself. I thumbed the flashlight alive, its beam a frantic probe against the tent walls, painting translucent trees beyond. No silhouette, no shadow puppet betrayed the walker, yet the steps persisted. Abruptly, the temperature inside the shelter plummeted. My breath erupted in thick, spectral clouds. Frost bloomed across the interior nylon, a delicate crystalline filigree spreading with an audible crackle. The footsteps paused again, settling before the tent's entrance. The zipper pull began its descent, inch by agonizing inch, moved by an unseen hand. I centered the rifle's muzzle on the widening gap, my finger white-knuckled on a trigger. Halfway down, it stopped. A blast of Hyperborean air surged in, so cold it seared my airways. My flashlight beam faltered, flickered like a dying pulse, and extinguished. Darkness absolute. Then a soft, sliding sound from within the tent's confines. The cold intensified, becoming a physical pain. I fired 3 times through the tent wall. Each muzzle flash was a strobe, illuminating the interior in fractured instants. Nothing. Yet I felt it. A density, a presence sharing the cramped space. Breathing became agony in the glacial air. Slashing wildly with my knife, I tore through the tent's rear panel and plunged out into the consuming blackness. I ran, a primal flight, faster than I knew limbs could propel me, crashing through unseen obstacles, stumbling over roots that clawed like skeletal hands. Branches lashed my face, my lungs burned, inhaling shards of ice. The footsteps hammered behind me, gaining. The cold pursued, a tangible wave of Arctic malice rolling through the forest. No backward glances, only the desperate pump of legs and lungs. Time dissolved. Eventually, my muscles screamed surrender. I collapsed against the rough bark of a massive pine. The pursuing steps slowed, then ceased nearby. I formed intricate patterns on the bark around my refuge. My fingers were turning a ghastly blue. The cold was an unbearable pressure. Fumbling, I activated my watch's backlight. 2:17 a.m. The exact moment the nightmare began, returned or perhaps never departed. The watch face glazed with frost even as I stared. The footsteps started once more, but this time retreating. Slowly, almost grudgingly, the temperature began to climb. Minutes crawled by before the forest tentatively reclaimed its voice. The tentative chirp of a cricket, the rustle of unseen life, a distant owl's mournful cry. I remained there until dawn painted the eastern peaks, shivering uncontrollably, rifle clutched like a talisman. When full light returned, I navigated back to my violated camp. The tent lay in shreds, perforated by 3 bullet holes. Everything within lay coated in a thick layer of frost, mocking the mild morning air. My camera, miraculously intact amidst the ruin, held the final insult. The memory card, wiped clean of all my journey's images, contained but a single file, an empty black rectangle, time-stamped 2:17 a.m. I salvaged what I could and began the long hike out, an 8-hour trek fueled by adrenaline's dregs. Camping has since become a forgotten pleasure. Sometimes sleep is shattered, and I find myself checking my watch, dread pooling as the digits approach that cursed time. In quiet moments, the phantom cadence of those steps returns, heavy and deliberate, and sometimes, inexplicably, even under a summer sun, a breath of impossible cold whispers against my skin. I sought answers, scouring obscure forums and local lore archives for similar accounts tied to that region. Whispers emerged, hikers speaking of inexplicable cold spots that defied season, of sudden total sound vacuums, of unseen escorts pacing them through the deep woods. Few spoke plainly, preferring oblique warnings against solitary ventures there. The strangest postscript came from my physician. Worried about the state of my extremities, blue-black that night, I sought medical advice. He found 0 tissue damage, dismissing my descriptions of the cold as impossible. Such temperatures, he insisted, would have induced severe frostbite, likely proving fatal within minutes. What stalked me in those woods remains nameless, formless. I harbor no desire to christen it, yet questions persist, buzzing like trapped flies in my mind. What would the flashlight beam have revealed had it not failed? What shared the suffocating confines of my tent? Where did 3 rifle rounds vanish into the night? And why, each night, does my watch pause, freezing for 60 seconds at precisely 2:17 a.m.? These questions haunt, but less profoundly than the memory of the footsteps, that slow, inexorable rhythm, the sound of something vast and unnatural treading the darkness. The way it played with me, circling, retreating, advancing, as if savoring the bouquet of my terror. The tent remains, stuffed into a storage box in the garage, its wounds, bullet holes, and knife slash, stark reminders. The thought of closer examination arises, a search for some physical trace, some clue, but I refrain. Because sometimes, late at night, a faint rustling emanates from that box, like dry leaves stirred within, and passing near it, the air always seems to thin, to chill. Last week, a letter arrived, plain envelope, no return address. Inside, a single photograph, my campsite, taken from the concealing darkness of the tree line. There I sat by the fire, oblivious, and just behind me, shimmering, indistinct, a distortion rippled the air, like heat haze on asphalt, but colder, sharper. It possessed a vaguely humanoid outline, and it was reaching. The timestamp printed in the corner, 2:16 a.m. Before consigning the image to flames, my eyes caught something deeper within the photographed woods. More distortions, dozens, faint ripples against the black, all oriented toward my small circle of light, waiting. They remain, I am certain, sequestered in those ancient woods, waiting for the next solitary soul, waiting for another chance to, what? Hunt? Play? Feed? The purpose remains terrifyingly obscure, but heed this. Should you ever find yourself alone beneath the trees and the world falls silent around you, do not hesitate. Do not rationalize. Run. Flee toward any promise of light or civilization. Because if you hear those ponderous steps, if you feel that unnatural cold begin to bite, you are already found. They have you, and they will take their time orbiting your fear until the clock strikes 2:17 a.m. Always 2:17 a.m. I try to dismiss it as hallucination, a stress-induced phantasm. Then I glance at my watch, forever stuttering at that specific minute each night. I remember the frost-rimed ruin of my tent. I recall the impossible cold, the sound of those footsteps, the palpable presence in the blackness. It was real, undeniably. Something impossible discovered me in the wilderness, and sometimes, in the deepest hours of the night, I fear it followed me home, because now when I wake abruptly at 2:17 a.m., I hear footsteps in my own house, heavy, deliberate, circling, and the air grows colder and colder and colder still. Memory clings to the echo, the first time footfalls sounded where silence should have reigned. My name is Silas. My nights are spent guarding ghosts of industry, specifically a cavernous building materials warehouse marooned in a blighted expanse on the city's forgotten edge. The ritual was simple: trace the perimeter's weary fence line, confirm the integrity of the chain link, ensure the main gate stood impassive and locked. Most nights offered only the vast, indifferent quiet. I'd ink entries into a worn logbook, noting trivialities, surrendering to the slow tick of hours until dawn released me. Months bled together in this predictable rhythm. Isolation, a state others might dread, felt like a balm. I am not built for easy camaraderie. The long, solitary vigils were never taxing. Leaning against the cold steel of the entrance post, watching the distant, blinking eyes of factories across the wasteland, I found a peculiar contentment in my self-contained world. Then came the night that fractured the stillness. Now, clocking in doesn't bring solace, only a thrumming tension beneath the skin. Arrival is typically near 10. The yard lights cast a weak, jaundiced glow, barely illuminating the hulking gate and a slice of the parking lot, a cracked canvas of gravel and concrete. The warehouse itself looms, a vast structure of corrugated metal beneath a soaring, unseen roof. Daytime sees the rumble and groan of trucks, but after 6, profound silence descends. My command post is a cramped office near the front, home to my thermos of lukewarm coffee, a heavy-duty flashlight, and the console displaying the grainy narratives of the security cameras. The surveillance system is rudimentary at best. A scattering of cameras watches over the loading docks and peers down a couple of the main interior arteries. Their feeds flicker onto a small, monochrome monitor. Motion sensors, crude but functional, trip a highlight on the screen. Usually, it's just the fleeting passage of a stray cat or the ghostly dance of wind-whipped plastic near a gap in the wall. Lately, however, those transient blips have acquired a sinister weight. The inaugural footfalls arrived near 2 in the morning. I was perched on a metal stool in the office, the door wedged open against the night's stagnant warmth. Deep within the warehouse's unlit belly, a long corridor stretches from the office zone towards sequestered storage rooms. A dreary passage floored in concrete, flanked by towering shelves laden with spare parts and boxed ceramics. From this corridor, the sound emerged, distinct, measured steps. Initially, my mind grasped for mundane explanations. water dripping onto warped wood, the groan of metal contracting in the cool air. But the sound defied randomness. It possessed the deliberate cadence of someone walking slowly. I rose, flashlight finding my hand, a knot tightening low in my gut. A sudden, icy sweat prickled the back of my neck. A thief, I reasoned, scavenging for copper wire or tools, not unheard of in this decaying district. Stepping out of the office, I thumbed the flashlight on. Its beam carved a path through the gloom, illuminating stacks of pallets and motes of dust suspended in the still air. I advanced cautiously, eyes fixed on the corridor's vanishing point. The moment I drew near, the footsteps ceased. "Anyone there?" I called out, my voice sounding thin in the immense space. Silence answered. I'd half expected the scuffle of retreat, a shadow flitting behind shelving, but there was only the faint, persistent hum of a distant fluorescent tube. My palms grew slick against the flashlight's casing. After a beat, heart hammering, I pushed deeper, sweeping the light behind boxes, under shelves. Nothing. My own breathing felt unnaturally loud. Back in the office, I scrutinized the cameras. The monitor showed a fleeting disturbance on one sensor feed, a momentary blur, then stillness. No discernible shape. I remained glued to the screen, waiting for a reappearance, but the sensor line stayed stubbornly flat. Eventually, I tried to dismiss it. Imagination, an odd echo, yet an unshakable sense of wrongness lingered. The second visitation occurred several nights later, around the same desolate hour. I was completing my perimeter walk, having checked the fence, circled behind the loading docks, and was heading back towards the office sanctuary. As I re-entered the warehouse's main space, a noise, a soft, abrasive scrape on concrete, like a dragging shoe, brought me up short. I held my breath, listening intently. Then, the footsteps began anew, heavier this time, the solid thud of boots. Whipping around, I cast my flashlight beam down the long corridor and saw it, a dark figure, stationary, facing me, featureless, merely a silhouette carved from the deeper shadows. My lungs seized. I braced for it to flee, to shout. It did neither. It simply stood, an unnerving, motionless sentinel. My heart hammered against my ribs. My arms felt strangely distant, numb. A word caught in my tight throat. I forced it out. "Hey." The sound echoed, swallowed by the vastness. The figure remained impassive. I took a hesitant step forward, pinning it with the light. The shape seemed to waver, its edges unstable, flickering like faulty projection. I blinked, adjusted the beam, trying to force clarity. Another 10 paces closer, maybe. By the time I reached a spot where it had stood, the space was empty, utterly void. I swept the area frantically, checked every alcove, peered behind dense stacks of boxed goods. No one. A tremor ran through my arms, a chill unrelated to the ambient temperature. The urge to bolt outside, to call the authorities, surged. But what report could I possibly file? That I'd seen a shadow dissolve. Returning to the office, I replayed the camera footage. Again, only brief, sequential flickers registered. The motion sensors flared one after another, tracing a rapid path, yet no coherent image formed, just static-like bursts. It defied logic. I knew how strays appeared on these monitors. They didn't trigger sensors in such perfect, swift succession. This entity did. Multiple viewings offered no enlightenment. The remainder of the shift passed in a state of hypervigilance. I patrolled more frequently, searching for forced entry, checking locks on exterior doors. Everything remained secure. As the first gray light of dawn seeped through the high windows, my nerves felt frayed to the breaking point. From that night forward, relaxation became an alien concept. Each shift unfolded under a perceived scrutiny. Sounds materialized from the silence, faint, metallic taps against shelving, a low, grating noise along the concrete walls, and always the footsteps. Sometimes they whispered, like bare feet traversing the floor. Other times, they resounded with the weight of heavy work boots. Leaving the relative safety of the office became an ordeal. Crossing the main floor felt fraught with unseen risk. My flashlight became an extension of my hand, its beam constantly probing corners, scanning behind pallets and bins, anticipating an ambush that never came. No physical evidence ever surfaced, no signs of intrusion, no missing inventory. The daytime crew reported nothing amiss. I tentatively mentioned the noises to a foreman, who offered a dismissive shrug. Place is old, he'd mumbled, bound to make noises. He advised against worrying. Eventually, I ceased mentioning it. My concerns were met with amusement, remarks like, "Watch out for the ghost, Silas," followed by easy laughter. It wasn't amusing. I attempted to chart the occurrences, logging the times I heard the steps or saw the camera flickers. No discernible pattern emerged, sometimes near midnight, sometimes closer to 3. Occasionally, a whole shift might pass undisturbed, though such respites grew increasingly rare. Sleep became fragmented during the day, haunted by the memory of that still, dark figure. My established routines crumbled under the weight of anxiety. One night, determined to debunk my own senses, I resolved to sweep the entire warehouse every hour, precisely on the hour. At 11, a full circuit, storage rooms, loading dock, the long corridor. Everything meticulously noted, nothing disturbed. Midnight, the same procedure, still quiet. By 1, a measure of calm returned. Perhaps keeping busy was the antidote to imagined threats. Then, around 1:30, back in the office chair, I saw the camera feed light up. A flicker jumped from camera 1 near the south entrance loading bay, directly to camera 3 in the main hallway, bypassing camera 2 entirely. Something had traversed that distance instantaneously, impossibly. Flashlight clenched. I bolted from the office, pulse pounding in my temples, hands trembling. Entering the hallway, I immediately heard movement near the far corner, a quick, shuffling sound. I sprinted towards it, my boots echoing thunderously on the concrete, the overhead beam seeming to vibrate with each stride. Rounding the corner, flashlight beam stabbing ahead, I saw nothing. It was a dead end, blocked by stacked plywood sheets and lengths of metal pipe. No doors, no exits, nowhere to hide. I circled the stacks, convinced I'd cornered someone. The space was empty. A visceral knot tightened in my stomach. My breathing came in ragged gasps. My legs felt unsteady. I leaned against the plywood, steadying myself, the flashlight beam quivering in my grip. Listening intently, the only sound was the frantic rhythm of my own respiration. There was no rational explanation for how anyone could simply vanish there. It was then I recognized the shift within me, from mere unease to profound physical fear. My arms tingled. The urge to flee was overwhelming, yet the harsh reality of needing this job anchored me. I am not a man of means. Quitting impulsively wasn't an option. So I swallowed the terror and endured until morning, mentioning this specific incident to no one. Disbelief, accusations of instability. I could already hear them. Weeks bled into a worsening cycle. The footsteps grew bolder, more frequent. Sometimes they sounded so terrifyingly close, I'd spin around, flashlight raised, expecting to confront someone directly behind me. In a desperate bid for clarity, I even rigged up a cheap webcam in a corridor I suspected was a frequent route. It captured nothing beyond those same ephemeral flickers, movements too swift and indistinct to identify. Standing sentinel in a hallway, waiting, became an exercise in psychological torment. The sensation of approach was palpable, yet no face ever materialized, no voice ever sounded. Always this silent presence, melting away upon direct attention. One particularly restless night stands out, pacing between the office and the storerooms, constantly checking my watch. Around 3, a sharp, resonant clang shattered to silence, metal pipe striking concrete. I nearly levitated. The sound originated from the far end of the main warehouse floor, near stacked crates. I ran, flashlight beam bouncing wildly, knuckles white around a grip. Reaching the spot, I found a length of steel pipe rolling languidly across the floor. Its origin was a shelf perhaps 6 feet high, positioned such that a random fall seemed impossible. Something had dislodged it. I scanned the surrounding area, searching desperately for any sign of movement. Stillness, only the pipe completing its slow circles before settling. My breath hitched in my chest. Retrieving the pipe, I replaced it on the shelf, then spent the subsequent hour methodically patrolling every aisle, checking every door again. No one. Logic offers no solace for these events. I know only the sensations, the persistent feeling of being observed, the certainty that someone stands just beyond the next corner, listening, and the emptiness when I round that corner, fleeting glimpses, a shape gliding past a forklift, melting behind pallets, always too quick, too indistinct, like peripheral phantoms. My skin prickles at these moments. My heart begins its frantic gallop. My throat constricts. I tell myself it's fatigue, imagination running wild in the oppressive silence. I try anchoring my thoughts to practicalities, the upcoming paycheck, the logbook entries, plans for after the shift. Then the steps return. Music from my phone offers no shield. I inevitably pause it, most straining to hear over the melody. Ignoring the random sounds is impossible now. Each creak, each scrape sparks anxiety. Is someone toying with me, lying in wait? The cameras remain my reluctant allies, offering only those baffling, inconclusive flickers. Nothing tangible enough to present to management. Complaining further, I suspect, would only brand me unfit for duty. One night, after the figure manifested again at a hallway's terminus, I undertook an exhaustive search. Nearly 2 hours spent probing every recess, opening every unlocked door, shining my light into every shadow-laden corner, behind towering crates, beneath dusty tarps, inside empty shipping containers, behind dormant machinery. I found no trace of human habitation or intrusion, no footprints besides my own boot marks, no discarded wrappers, no makeshift beds, nothing to suggest flesh and blood trespassers. Yet the entire time, the oppressive feeling of being watched never abated. My heart pounded relentlessly. By the search's end, I was soaked in sweat, clothes clinging damply, legs trembling. I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that tall, ill-defined shape looming behind me. The silence is perhaps the most unnerving aspect. Whatever this thing is, it issues no vocalization, just the sound of its passage, footsteps, a subtle drag or scrape. It interacts physically, shifting boxes, knocking down pipes, but never communicates, never confronts, never fully reveals itself. It simply persists at the edge of perception, a nebulous form haunting the dimly lit corridors. I possess no explanation, only the visceral certainty of a presence felt most acutely as a sickening tension tightening in my chest the moment I step onto the warehouse floor each night. I still work here, arrive at 10, secure the gate, check the doors, retreat to the office. I leave more lights blazing now, utility costs be damned. The added illumination provides scant comfort, doing little to deter the footsteps, but it makes the vast emptiness feel marginally less threatening. Thoughts of abandoning this post surface often, but financial necessity binds me, and perhaps a stubborn sliver of curiosity, the hope that one day I might capture definitive proof, an answer to the enigma. Thus far, answers remain elusive. I have only my senses, my experiences. The memory of that dark figure standing watching, then vanishing. The undeniable evidence of moved objects in an empty space. The cryptic dance of light on the monitor screens. And the constant, low-grade fear. The tightness in my chest. The prickle at my nape signaling unseen proximity. That is the sum of it. Nothing provable, yet undeniably real to me. So I continue the rounds, monitor the screens, and wait. It hasn't caused physical harm. No theft or damage marks its passage. Yet the tension is a constant companion. Footfalls echo in corridors that logic dictates are empty, and each time my flashlight beam cuts through the darkness in pursuit, it finds only silence and vacancy. I depart each morning with shoulders knotted and a dull ache behind my eyes. I return the following night, clinging to the frail hope for quiet, a hope invariably dashed. That presence is a fixture now, just beyond the periphery, a constant reminder that in this desolate warehouse, I am not truly alone. That's the reality. I hear it. I glimpse its fleeting form. I feel its weight every time I cross the threshold. It never speaks, never shows its face, never offers resolution, only this slow erosion of certainty, this haunting question mark hanging in the dusty air. But it's undeniably there, so I keep showing up, flashlight clutched tight, trying to navigate the night. This is my life now. This is all I know. Amidst the quiet hum of my computer, While crafting an email in the confines of my home office, a sound intruded, the muted clatter of keys meeting the low pile of the carpet. Soft, yes, but it jolted me upright. Nothing resided on my desk, a simple expanse of wood that could have precipitated such a fall. The office itself offered little complexity. Desk, chair, a steel filing cabinet hugging one wall. To my right, a small window framed up a slice of the mundane street outside. My head swiveled instinctively. There they lay, glinting dully beside my chair. A single, hard hammer blow struck within my chest. Recognition was instantaneous, visceral. These were the keys lost 2 weeks prior, swallowed by the chaos of a party in a different city, keys I'd long consigned to the realm of irrecoverable things. Their sudden materialization on my own floor sent a cold constriction through my gut. I rose, bent, and retrieved them. The metal was chill against my palm, its familiar edges pressing into my skin. The memory surfaced, Marcus's birthday bash, crammed into a neighboring city apartment. Late hour, thick with bodies and noise. Though I'd nursed a couple of beers, clarity remained, or so I'd thought, enough to track my essentials: wallet, phone, keys. Then the void where the keys should have been. A frantic search ensued, beneath sofas, in the bathroom's confines, burrowing through cushions. Queries launched into the din. Seen a set of car keys? Little leather fob? Blank faces met my rising anxiety, the hour-long drive home looming. Marcus offered his couch, a temporary reprieve. The next day involved a locksmith, a violated lock, and later a police report filed, a formality, a faint hope against hope. After a week drifted by, I surrendered, gone for good. And now, here they were, heavy in my hand. A faint pulse throbbed at my temples as my mind grappled with the impossible. My phone displayed the time, just past 3 in the afternoon. A scan of the compact office revealed nothing amiss. The window latch was secure. The door to the hallway stood open, its usual state. Placing the keys deliberately on the desk, I drew a slow, deliberate breath, then another. A fine tremor agitated my hands. The impulse to call Marcus flickered, then died, smothered by the sheer absurdity. How would that conversation even begin? Hey, remember those keys I lost? They just manifested on my floor. Ridiculous. I let it lie. Later that evening, the kitchen became my stage. Living alone means culinary simplicity, microwave alchemy, or swift stovetop creations. Under the glare of the overhead fixture, dinner preparations commenced. Then, a flicker. Brief, an electrical hiccup. Easily dismissed. The house wore its age, prone to minor electrical eccentricities. It stuttered again, a more pronounced spasm this time, before settling back into steady luminescence. I paid it little mind, but as I ate, an uncanny sensation prickled the nape of my neck, the distinct feeling of being observed. My gaze darted to the kitchen doorway, once, twice, nothing, only emptiness and a burgeoning disquiet gnawing my stomach. I forced my attention back to the meal, the tension refusing to subside. Later still, venturing towards my bedroom for some forgotten item, a floorboard groaned in the hallway. Houses settle, temperatures shift, timbers complain, common occurrences. Yet this sound possessed a different quality, the deliberate weight of a footstep finding the weakest point in the plank. I froze, listening intently, mouth suddenly arid, pulse accelerating. Silence answered. Waiting, straining, I heard nothing more. I snapped on the hallway light. Empty. A quick check confirmed the front door remained bolted. A patrol through the living room, the spare guest room, all appeared undisturbed. Just nerves, I told myself. Residual static from the bizarre reappearance of the keys. Skittishness. The following day found me anchored to the sofa, television murmuring. My thoughts, however, kept circling back to the keys. I'd relocated them to a small ceramic dish by the front entrance, a repository for loose change. From the hallway drifted an attenuated clicking, faint but distinct, like metal gently tapping against wood or plaster. I muted the television, head cocked. The clicking ceased. Rising, I moved towards the sound's origin. The dish was empty. The keys lay several feet away on the floorboards, near the corner where wall met wall, as if fallen? Perhaps. But the distance was wrong, suggesting a trajectory born of force, a toss, a slide. Bending, I collected them once more. That familiar coolness seeped into my fingers. I attempted nonchalance, a mental shrug, but a sharp twinge resonated in my chest, that same unsettling vibration from before. A new ritual began. Double-checking door locks before sleep claimed me. The living room lamp now burned through the night, a beacon against the encroaching shadows, despite my aversion to wasted electricity. Darkness within the house had acquired a new, unsettling weight. Sleep became fragmented. Often, around the spectral hours of 2 or 3 a.m., I'd surface, convinced I'd heard footfalls. My heart would launch into a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a cold sweat blooming. The house settling, I'd rationalize. Pipes gurgling. Sometimes, propelled by sheer dread, I'd rise, flood the hallway with light, and stand rigid, listening until only the ringing in my own ears remained. Nothing visible, ever. Yet the conviction lingered, unshakable. I was not alone. Days later, back in the home office, immersed again in the digital tide of emails. The overhead light performed its unsettling ballet. Flicker, flicker, a brief plunge into darkness, then resurrection. My computer screen glowed unwavering, not a power surge then, something localized almost, playful, malignant. Rubbing my face, I fought to regain focus, then directly behind me a sound, unmistakable, a swift, soft shuffle. I launched from the chair, sending it skittering back on its casters. I spun around. Empty space greeted me, my eyes fixed on the spot, scanning for the slightest disturbance in the air. My breathing grew shallow. I forced deep, deliberate inhalations. Every muscle fiber felt taut, my fingers trembling uncontrollably. An urgent need to escape surged through me. Jacket snatched, keys forgotten for the moment I fled the house. I drove aimlessly, tracing the familiar grid of my neighborhood, the engine's hum a counterpoint to the frantic static in my head. A coffee shop offered sanctuary. I sat nursing a brew, caffeine an unwelcome jolt at this hour, my mind racing through improbable scenarios. An intruder playing cruel games? Or had I inadvertently carried something back from Marcus's party, some unseen, inexplicable contagion? The timeline mocked me. Keys vanish in one city, rematerialize 2 weeks later in my supposedly secure home. And since their return, flickering lights, phantom noises, the constant, unnerving sensation of scrutiny. Returning near 7 that evening, the porch light cast a welcoming if fragile glow. Pausing in the entryway, I felt it, a distinct chill permeating the air, unrelated to the ambient temperature. The thermostat in the hall confirmed its normal setting. I nudged it higher anyway. Then I saw them, the keys, resting on the small console table beneath the hallway mirror. Before leaving, I'd placed them in the ceramic dish. Carefully, I picked them up. The weight felt ordinary, but my thumb brushed against a faint, rough scratch marring the leather fob, a detail I couldn't recall. I traced its edge before returning the keys, yet again, to the dish. Dinner prep in the kitchen felt like moving through denser air, distraction proving elusive, the sense of unease a constant companion. The subsequent week saw an escalation. Light switches became temperamental, bulbs stuttering until cycled off and on. In the liminal space between wakefulness and sleep, distinct footsteps would pace the living room, slow, measured treads. I'd bolt upright, adrenaline searing through me, listening until my ears throbbed in the ensuing silence. Inspections always yielded the same result: empty rooms, undisturbed furniture, drawn curtains concealing nothing. My eyes would dart, hungry for confirmation, finding only solitude. An attempt to capture the sounds on my phone yielded only static hiss and the ragged rhythm of my own breathing. An electrician was summoned. He performed his diagnostics, checked breakers, tested wires, pronounced everything fundamentally sound. A couple of aging switches were replaced, but no definitive fault found. Could faulty wiring cause random flickers, maybe even wall noises? Possible, he conceded, but unlikely to mimic footsteps. He chuckled, suggesting raccoons in the attic. I possess no attic. That evening, the lights seemed to flicker with renewed, almost mocking intensity. Sleep became a scarce commodity. I'd wake gasping, heart pounding, convinced I'd heard breathing near the bed. A constant jitter plagued my limbs. My eyes burned with fatigue. Concentration at work dissolved. The computer screen blurred, replaced by the image of keys on carpet, the memory of cold spots in the house. Locking doors and windows became an obsession, checked and rechecked before leaving each morning. Evenings brought a growing reluctance to return home. One night, mid-ritual in the bathroom, toothbrush poised, foam clinging to my lips, a sound shattered the quiet, a single, solid rap on the bathroom door. Not tentative, but firm, a summons. I froze, staring at the wood grain, chest tightening. The door wasn't locked. Heart hammering, I twisted the knob violently, yanking the door open, braced for what? The hallway stretched before me, empty, bathed in its usual light. Leaving the bathroom illuminated, I conducted another sweep of the house. The living room lamp pulsed erratically. My breath hitched. The faint, acrid scent of my own fear rose around me. Finishing my brushing required immense effort, my shaking hands spattering toothpaste across the basin. After that night, the keys were relegated to a drawer in my bedside table. Out of sight, perhaps out of influence, the hope was futile. The lights continued their erratic dance, or the phantom footsteps persisted. Once, standing in the living room, a sudden, distinct current of air brushed my arm, cold and deliberate. I recoiled, nearly dropping my phone. No open window, no vent, no conceivable source for such a localized draft. My skin crawled, the frantic drumming in my ears almost deafening. Again, I sought refuge outside, gulping the night air. Attempts to confide in friends were tentative, veiled in complaints about wiring and settling noises. They offered practical advice. Check for rodents, consider a home inspection. I withheld the core absurdity, the keys, their impossible journey. The fear of being dismissed as unstable, or worse, fabricating drama, kept the true narrative locked inside. Yet deep down, a chilling certainty grew, defying logic. Those keys, lost miles away, reappeared here, and everything changed from that precise moment. Last night, reading on my phone in bed, seeking exhaustion, the bedroom door was ajar, admitting a sliver of the hallway light. A faint, rhythmic shuffling began, persistent, like slippered feet dragging softly across the carpet. Ignoring it proved impossible. Chest tight, breath shallow, I strained to listen. The sound seemed localized just beyond the door. Propping myself on an elbow, I peered cautiously into the illuminated corridor. Nothing. Just empty space, familiar carpet. Yet the hairs on my neck prickled, my shoulders bunched defensively, that familiar pressure building in my chest. Abruptly, the hallway light blinked. Off, then instantly on again. A momentary plunge into blackness that felt infinite. My heart slammed against my ribs. My jaw clenched until it ached. Sleep, when it finally came, was a turbulent sea, drifting in and out, perpetually braced for the sound of footsteps. My dreams, or the fevered fragments between sleep and waking, were variations on a theme, walking through my own house, flicking light switches that refused to hold, plunging rooms into recurrent darkness. I woke multiple times, drenched in sweat, t-shirt clinging damply to my back, staring at the familiar ceiling shadowed by an unfamiliar dread. The thought echoed relentlessly. Whatever hitched a ride with those keys, whatever presence now shared my space, it wasn't leaving. Tossing the keys away feels like tempting fate, potentially escalating the phenomena. Logic whispers alternatives, a forgotten return, stress manifesting as hyper-awareness, mundane electrical faults. But each flicker caught peripherally, each anomalous creak, each whisper of cold air where none should be, drags me back to the initial shock, the keys on the carpet, and a pervasive wrongness that seeped into my life from that moment forward. I rearrange furniture, clean obsessively, desperate to disrupt the tension. It persists, a palpable weight, strongest in the deep hours of the night, the chilling certainty that something is right here with me. And so, I sit here now, back in the office where it began, typing these words, attempting to impose order on the inexplicable, clinging to the hope of a rational explanation. But with every unexpected flicker, every floorboard's groan outside the rhythm of the house's usual size, the memory floods back, the cold metal in my palm, the jolt of impossible recognition, and the chilling realization that my home may no longer be entirely my own. Safety feels like a memory from a different life. Its aroma clings still, the parched exhalation of forgotten things assaulting the senses the instant that ponderous portal yielded. Hinges screamed, a protracted groan of tormented metal, the sound dying unanswered down desolate corridors. Within, Illumination faltered. Meager lamps cast tremulous circles upon scarred tables, their unsteady radiance swallowed by shelves thick with the sediment of years. Volumes huddled shoulder to shoulder, seemingly undisturbed since their interment. A scattering of skeletal chairs punctuated the gloom, upholstery ravaged, one listing precariously on a fractured leg. Solitude was a certainty here. This mausoleum of words drew no pilgrims now, precisely why I'd sought it out. I craved sanctuary from bright, welcoming spaces, from the solicitous inquiries of librarians. Here, amidst the quiet rot, no one would hinder my exploration, my tactile communion with every time-worn binding I desired. A whisper, an antiquated name, snagged from the periphery of hearing, a designation banished from common parlance, had drawn me. Its existence demanded verification. With time heavy on my hands and a thirst for the peculiar, I pursued it. The usual quarry, spectral hearsay, evaporating rumors, peculiar local fictions, often proved barren, yet this particular thread hummed with an unfamiliar resonance. A baseless intuition, perhaps, but insistent nonetheless. That initial foray yielded only dust, layered thick as velvet, and a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. My fingers traced the spines, disturbing slumbering particles that danced in the weak light, provoking a dry cough that reverberated unnervingly. My own respiration seemed amplified, intrusive. Ancient floorboards complained beneath my tread. No curators, no fellow trespassers, only a solitary sentinel desk near the entrance, bearing a dim lamp and a guest register. Its pages gaped, vacant for half a decade. Still, I inscribed my name, Elias Thorne, a small act of defiance against the emptiness. My satchel deposited onto a table, I commenced my survey of the aisles. Guidance was scant. Labels, where they existed, curled away from the wood like desiccated skin. Locating the older archives became an exercise in guesswork. I wrestled volumes free, their covers worn smooth, their pages fused by time and neglect, deciphering titles that offered no enlightenment. Hours bled away, revealing nothing save stacks of brittle, bound newspapers, which I returned to their crypts. A chill permeated the air, distinct from the warmth I'd left outside. This place harbored its own internal climate, perpetually cooler. Seeking refuge, I found a nook furnished with derelict chairs and a diminutive reading table. I chose a spot, allowing my gaze to soften, my mind to drift on the quietude, not sleep, but a loosening of awareness. Then a distinct thump, soft yet definitive, like a dropped book echoing from afar. Alertness snapped me upright. I scanned the shadowed expanse. Nothing. The aisle stretched into obscurity, punctuated by the epileptic flicker of distant bulbs. A flicker of movement, perhaps, at the edge of vision, or merely tired eyes conjuring phantoms. Voiceless, I held my breath, listening. Silence reclaimed its throne. Dismissing it as fatigue, I retreated to my seat. Returning the following day near the same hour, I resumed the methodical search. Behind a towering, awkwardly positioned bookcase, I discovered a fissure, a narrow passage leading into deeper obscurity. Squeezing through, I entered a windowless back room where the gloom intensified. My torch, retrieved from my bag, cast a wavering beam across the rough, uneven floor. Crates overflowed with brittle journals. As I sifted through them, the stubborn pages resisted separation. Here, the scent thickened, evolving from dry dust to the damp, cloying miasma of mold. A tightness constricted my chest. A cough tore through the stillness. The airborne decay was overwhelming. Retreat, I decided, was necessary. As I pivoted, a shape materialized behind the shelving. Tall, vaguely human, yet utterly devoid of detail. A silhouette defined by absence. No face, no features discernible in the murk. I blinked, and the space was empty once more. A trick of the light, my mind insisted, struggling against a rising tide of unease. I swept the area with my torch, pacing the confines. Nothing but shelves, crates, and the oppressive quiet. I forced myself onward. Later that evening, moments before departure, my hand fell upon a singular volume. Its spine, unusually thick, bore no title. The leather surface, cracked like parched earth, had surrendered its original hue. Prying it open required coaxing, the pages adhering stubbornly. When a few yielded, they revealed a dense, looping script, notations perhaps, or a diary. The ink had bled, blurring the words. An odor emanated from it, worse than the ambient mustiness, redolent of something fundamentally spoiled. A leaden weight settled in my gut. My pulse quickened as I turned another fragile leaf. No logical cause for alarm presented itself, yet apprehension coiled within me. Concluding that better light and clearer thoughts were required, I set it aside for the morrow. As I turned to leave, I glimpsed it again, the featureless silhouette standing sentinel at the aisle's far end. Tall, immobile. The overhead lights stuttered, and it dissolved. Cold sweat beaded on my brow. I fled, refusing the urge to look back. Fortified by strong coffee from a thermos, I faced the third day with renewed, albeit anxious, determination. The great door issued its customary lament. The hall remained deserted. The desk lamp, however, glowed, a lamp I distinctly recalled extinguishing upon my previous exit. A tremor of doubt. Had I? Yes, absolutely certain. Yet there it burned. Everything else seemed untouched. Retrieving the anomalous book, I settled beneath a brighter lamp. The script resolved slightly. Names, lists of them, some violently struck through, others circled. No dates, no context, just name after name scrolling down the page. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drummer responding to an unseen threat. The coffee tasted acrid. Deeper within the book, pages remained fused. Applying pressure, I heard the faint tear of fragile paper. Then, a page dominated by ink blots, obscuring most entries, save one. This name wasn't merely written, it seemed gouged into the vellum. I squinted, the letters refusing to coalesce into any familiar configuration. Staring, the pounding in my chest intensified. Sweat prickled beneath my shirt. I tried forming the sounds mentally, but the sequence felt alien, inherently wrong. A sudden scraping noise erupted behind me. I spun around. A chair, previously tucked neatly beneath its table, now stood askew, inches away. No draft stirred the heavy air. I was utterly alone. A tremor ran down my leg. Cautiously, I circled the table, touching the chair. Its wood felt unnaturally cold. The entire library seemed to have shed degrees. Rubbing my arms against the chill, I returned to the book. Later, drawn back to the hidden rear chamber, Hoping for context regarding the unsettling name, I resumed my search through the crates. This time, I heard it. Breathing. Slow, rhythmic, distinctly not my own. I froze, straining to pinpoint the source. It emanated from behind a monolithic bookshelf. Peering through a crack, I saw only profound darkness. My flashlight beam sputtered. I rapped it against my palm. The breathing ceased. Silence rushed back in, broken only by the frantic thudding in my ears. A full minute passed in absolute stillness. Nothing stirred. I resolved to leave. As I turned, an immense pressure bore down on my shoulders, a palpable weight, as if unseen hands restrained me. I whirled around. Empty space. My own breath came in ragged gasps. The pressure vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Fatigue, I told myself. Stress. I exited the back room. Back in the main hall, flipping through the strange volume once more, I encountered the name again, scrawled near the bottom of a page. The script here was agitated, the pen having dug deep. Focusing on it provoked an icy prickle along my arms. A soft creak whispered behind me. Slowly, deliberately, I turned. It stood at the end of the aisle. The figure, featureless, a blank oval where a face should be, draped in what might have been a long coat or robe. The poor light precluded certainty. No eyes, no mouth, just absence. My heart leapt into my throat. My hands trembled violently. I opened my mouth, but no sound emerged. A hesitant step forward. The figure remained motionless. I blinked. Gone. Restlessly, I paced the library's length. Departure felt premature. The enigma demanded resolution. I plucked another book at random. Local legends, brief accounts of spectral lights, rumored hidden passages, trivialities, nothing concerning the name. A growl from my stomach reminded me of neglected sustenance. The coffee, now cold and stale, elicited a gag. Stowing the thermos, I attempted to refocus. Hours dissolved in aimless searching. The silence grew immense, ringing in my ears. Phantasmal footsteps seemed to echo my own, always just behind, always vanishing when I turned. At one point, the fine hairs on my arm lifted as a rush of frigid air swept past, potent enough to ruffle the pages of an open book nearby. I spun, seeking a source. No open windows, no doors ajar. The ancient lamp overhead swayed almost imperceptibly. Panic flickered, dampened by sheer will, though sweat slicked my back. My pulse leaped whenever the unutterable name surfaced in my thoughts. Saying it, even silently, felt like a transgression. Then, tucked within a heavy dictionary, I found it. A slip of brittle paper, inscribed with hurried handwriting. Do not speak the name in the old book. Do not attempt its utterance. Leave this place. My heart stuttered. A knot formed in my throat. The urge to flee warred with an inexplicable pull towards the table, towards the book. Pocketing the note, I walked slowly, deliberately back towards the volume. My legs felt unsteady, the oppressive weight returning to my shoulders, insistent, like phantom hands pressing down. Upon reaching the table, I found the book lying open to the same disturbing page. The name pulsed darkly on the vellum. Leaning closer, a peculiar heat bloomed in my chest. My hands shook as I gently touched the page. It felt strangely damp, clammy. Attempting to turn it, the leaf resisted, then tore slightly, revealing cryptic markings on the reverse. More unreadable script. A faint, dry scraping sound reached my ears. A swift scan of the room revealed nothing. The figure remained absent, alone yet profoundly watched. Time stretched, becoming elastic, meaningless. The lamps seemed to be waning, their light growing thin. My watch, I discovered, had stopped. Tapping it yielded nothing. How long had I been immersed in this deepening twilight? Escape beckoned, yet the need for answers held me captive. Perhaps, I reasoned, copying the name, taking it into the outside world for research, would yield something. Extracting a small notebook, I poised my pen. My hand trembled uncontrollably. The letters I managed to form were distorted, unrecognizable parodies of the original script. As I struggled to steady my grip, the pressure clamped down on my shoulders again. I straightened, scanning the empty aisles. Nothing. Jaw clenched, breath coming in shallow pants. I tried to regain control. Enough. I would leave. Snapping the old book shut provoked a muffled sound, like a distant, sorrowful moan. My head whipped around, empty. The desk lamp cast its lonely glow. I started towards the main entrance, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in a charged silence. Halfway there, movement flickered at the periphery. The figure stood at the terminus of an aisle, that blank, horrifying oval. I froze, heart battering my ribs. Clutching my satchel, I watched as it retreated, melting behind a bookshelf. A surge of desperate resolve propelled me forward. I rounded the corner, ready for confrontation. Nothing. Only aged books, a forgotten broom, dust-laden crates. The floor showed no disturbance, no footprints in the thick dust. Retreating slowly, a dull ache began to throb behind my eyes. Reaching the main door, I grasped the handle. It refused to turn, stuck fast. Panic surged anew. I threw a glance over my shoulder. The lamps flickered violently. A whisper slithered through the air. My own name, indistinct. I wrenched the handle with all my strength. Groaning, the heavy door yielded. I stumbled into the outer corridor. The air here felt marginally less oppressive, though still stale. Following the passage, I reached the final exit. It opened easily. Outside, late afternoon perhaps. The light was a flat, featureless gray. The street lay deserted. I drew deep breaths, the cool air a balm. My heart began a slow descent from its frantic pace. Finding a nearby bench, I sank onto it, striving for composure. Rummaging in my bag, I checked my notes. The warning slip was there. The notebook page bearing my failed attempt to copy the name looked wrong. The letters seemed to have shifted, warped further, inexplicable. My hands retained their tremor. The realization struck. I had left the nameless book behind. A fleeting impulse urged me back, but as I sat there, exposed to the open sky, the familiar pressure settled onto my shoulders. Less intense, yet undeniably present. I scanned my surroundings. No watchers, no faceless figures, nothing overtly strange. Yet the sensation lingered. Closing my eyes, I focused on breathing. The pressure eased slightly. Rising, I walked aimlessly. Returning was unthinkable. The memory of that blank visage, the causeless terror. I couldn't face it again. My chest remained tight. Rubbing my arms, I felt the day's chill deepen. I headed home, burdened by an experience I couldn't articulate, armed with nothing but fractured memories and useless notes. The library remained untouched in the following days. Online searches for the name or anything resembling my mangled transcription proved fruitless. The warning note felt like a fragment from a madman's diary. What had transpired? What had I witnessed? No obvious mechanism for trickery came to mind. The thought of returning with company surfaced, only to founder on the reality of the place's obscurity, its utter isolation. Who would believe, let alone accompany me? I attempted to bury the memory, but night brought phantom pressures, the sensation of unseen hands upon my shoulders. Small noises in my apartment, the scrape of a chair, the rustle of paper, sent jolts of adrenaline through me. Investigations always revealed nothing. Standing in the familiar safety of my own home, I felt the same gnawing tension, the same uncertainty. Answers remained elusive. Perhaps someday courage or desperation will drive me back, but not yet. For now, silence is my shield. I avoid dwelling on it, yet the recollection of that ancient volume, of the name festering within its pages, retains the power to quicken my pulse. I never spoke it aloud. I never will. Silence fell first, a heavy blanket smothering the city's hum. Then the darkness crashed down, absolute and suffocating. Ilara knew, not merely an outage. This sudden void felt predatory. As her fingers scrabbled blindly within the bedside drawer, seeking the familiar cylinder of her torch, a sound sliced through the unnatural quiet. A dry, metallic scraping from the hallway, the unmistakable violation of her apartment lock being tested. In that instant, the sprawling metropolis vanished, her existence contracting violently to the scant feet separating her from the front door. The blackout, she understood with chilling certainty, was the least of her terrors. She remained sculpted by fear, hand hovering uselessly over the jumble in the drawer. The grating sound persisted, escalating, each rasp against the metal tumblers, a tightening knot in her chest. Her pulse hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat surely audible beyond the door. At last, cool metal met her fingertips. The torch. She resisted the primal urge to flood the space with light. Such a sudden flare would betray her position instantly. Instead, she drew it close, a cold talisman against the encroaching dread, her mind a whirlwind of impossible calculations. This apartment, her supposed sanctuary, was little more than a shoebox suspended in the sky. A bed alcove, a sliver of kitchen, the cramped necessity of a bathroom. Few shadowed corners offered refuge, fewer still promised escape. The sole window presented only a dizzying plunge, 6 stories to the unforgiving pavement. She was cornered, the scraping ceased. A faint snick, sharp and final, pierced the silence, sending shards of ice through Ilara's veins. He was inside. She heard the groan of hinges as the door swung inward. Footfalls followed, measured and deliberate, claiming the territory of her home. Ilara held her breath, flattening herself into the narrow space between the wall and her bed, willing the profound darkness to swallow her whole. "I know you're here," a voice resonated, low and gravelly, laced with menace. a man's voice coarse and utterly alien. Why not make this simple for both of us? Stillness was her only shield. She didn't exhale, didn't twitch. Perhaps if she became inert, invisible, he might assume the space deserted and retreat. But silence stretched, unbroken by departing steps. Instead, shuffling sounds began, drawers pulled open, the rustle of her possessions being sifted. Every noise detonated in the blackness, her hearing stretched taut, mapping his unseen movements. Passivity was a death sentence. She had to move, to act. With excruciating slowness, she began to glide along the wall, navigating by memory toward the kitchenette. A knife, even a small one, offered a chance. Her foot snagged, a carelessly discarded trainer, and she lurched, a tiny gasp escaping her lips. The sound, insignificant moments ago, now echoed like a gunshot in the tomb-like quiet. The rummaging stopped. "Ah, there you are," he murmured, the voice closer now, far too close. Panic detonated within her. Stealth forgotten, Ilara scrambled, hands flung out into the void, aiming for the kitchen counter. She heard him pivot, his steps quickening, purposeful. Her hips struck the counter's sharp edge, pain flaring white-hot, but she pushed through it. Fingers swept frantically across the surface, scattering unseen objects, a desperate search for steel. Then, contact, the familiar curve of a handle. She seized the kitchen knife, whirled, and thumbed the switch on her torch. The beam sliced the darkness, pinning a face that would forever populate her nightmares. Tall, shadowed by a ragged beard, his eyes feral pools reflecting the torchlight. A heavy crowbar hung loosely in his grip. "Stay back," Ilara commanded, the words trembling despite her resolve. "The police are coming. I called them." A harsh bark of laughter scraped the air. "Liar. Phones are dead, darling. Just us." He advanced a step. Ilara retreated, her back finding the cold, hard line of the counter. The knife vibrated in her fist, the torch beam jittering wildly. "What do you want?" she choked out, stalling, praying for an opening, an idea. "Same as anyone," Silas replied, waving the crowbar vaguely. "Cash. Anything worth taking. Maybe just some company on a long, dark night like this." The insinuation coiled in her stomach like bile. Her grip tightened on the knife. She would use it. Her defiance must have registered, hardening the predatory gleam in his eyes. "Don't be stupid," he warned, the false congeniality evaporating. "Give me what I want. We walk away. Nobody gets hurt." But she saw the lie plain in the darkness. Acquiescence was not survival. It was merely delayed execution. She had to fight. A desperate lunge, the knife arcing forward. Silas recoiled, the blade whispering past him by a hair's breadth. The torch beam danced, plunging them into disorienting flickers of light and shadow. He snarled, raw fury replacing the mask. The crowbar whistled through the air. Ilara ducked instinctively, feeling the wind of its passage, hearing the sickening crack as it splintered the cabinet beside her head. She scrambled backward, seeking distance, but the darkness betrayed her. Her feet tangled, a fallen chair, sending her sprawling onto the floorboards. The knife skittered away, swallowed by the black. Agony shot through her knee from the impact, but adrenaline screamed louder. She heard him advancing, his breathing ragged with exertion and rage. Crawling blindly, her hands swept the floor, searching for any advantage. They closed on something solid, rectangular, a thick hardback book, scant defense but her only one. As his heavy tread drew near, looming above her, she coiled, then swung the book upward with every ounce of strength. A satisfying thump echoed as it connected. A grunt of pain rewarded her effort. Seizing the moment of his stunned pause, Ilara surged to her feet and fled. But where? The front door gaped open, a portal to more darkness, where he might easily overtake her on the stairs. The bathroom. A lock, perhaps a window, however small. She slammed the bathroom door, her fingers fumbling frantically with the lock mechanism in the pitch black. Just as the bolt slid home with a decisive click, a heavy weight thudded against the wood from the other side. "Open this door," Silas roared, his fist pounding against the panel. "Open it, damn you, or I'll break it down." Ilara backed away, eyes darting wildly around the tiny enclosure. The window, high, narrow, barely wide enough, but the only path left. As the assault on the door intensified, splintering cracks appearing in the wood, she clambered onto the toilet lid, reaching for the window latch. Stiff with paint and neglect, it resisted her trembling, desperate fingers. A loud crack split the air as the doorframe began to buckle. She threw all her weight into twisting the latch, finally wrenching the small window open. Cool night air flooded in, carrying the chaotic symphony of the powerless city, distant sirens, panicked shouts from the street below. With a final, deafening crash, the bathroom door burst inward. No time to look back, no space for hesitation. Ilara launched herself at the opening, scraping skin against the rough frame. For one heart-stopping second, she hung suspended, half in, half out, before fingers clamped around her ankles, trying to haul her back into the nightmare. A final convulsive shove, and she tumbled free. Her stomach plummeted with the certainty of a fatal fall, but instead of the long drop, she landed with a bone-jarring thud onto metal grating, a fire escape she hadn't known existed. The impact stole her breath, but the sound of Silas cursing as he tried to wedge his larger frame through the narrow window spurred her on. Ignoring the fire spreading through her bruised body, Ilara forced herself upright. The metal structure groaned and swayed beneath her as she descended, hand over hand, into the encompassing darkness as swiftly as she dared. Her feet hit solid alleyway pavement, and she ran with burning lungs and pounding legs, fueled by primal terror. Ran until the sounds of pursuit dissolved behind her, until she stumbled into a public square, flickering with the emergency lights of first responders coordinating amidst the citywide blackout. Later, wrapped in the crinkling foil of a shock blanket, a paramedic gently tending to her scrapes and bruises, the adrenaline finally ebbed, leaving her shaking uncontrollably as the full horror washed over her. Yet beneath the tremors, a different sensation began to dawn. She was alive. She had stared into the abyss and clawed her way back. As the first tentative fingers of sunrise began to paint the eastern sky, touching the edges of the darkened city with fragile light, Ilara knew Whatever came next, she would face it. She was stronger than the night, stronger than she had ever imagined. The memory crystallizes around those damnable prints, their first appearance materializing in the subterranean twilight of the cellar. Late afternoon light bled feebly through the grimy window wells. Hours I'd spent wrestling with cardboard sarcophagi, brimming with forgotten lives, my lungs thick with the effluvium of decay, each breath tasting of mildew and time. Throat raw, eyes stinging, I'd leaned against the cold stone wall for respite when my gaze snagged on them. Damp impressions, impossibly adherent to the overhead beams, as if some entity had performed an inverted perambulation across the dust-furred timber. A violent lurch seized my chest. I straightened, blinking, willing the dimness to confess its trickery. But the prints persisted, glistening faintly, their outlines irregular, imbued with a cold, vital dampness. An ache bloomed in my neck from the awkward upward angle. Silence descended thick and absolute, save for the frantic drumming of my own pulse against my eardrums. This ancestral pile, belonging to our line for generations, was a place I'd fled years prior for the anonymous compression of a city flat. My return was solely at the behest of my Uncle Arthur, now too frail for the task, who desired the place emptied, exorcised of its contents for sale. I'd never harbored affection for the house. Its scale felt vacant, its quietude less like peace and more like latency. Every shadowed corner hinted at concealment, some dormant unpleasantness. The cellar, especially, had always radiated unease, yet nothing had prepared me for this. My boots scraped hesitantly across the concrete as they drew nearer. A peculiar odor permeated the air, sharp, telluric, reminiscent of weeping stone. The impressions resolved into clearer focus, a sequence of ovoid shapes, vaguely pediform but fundamentally wrong. The digits, if they were digits, pointed askew. A palpable chill emanated from them. With a trembling hand, I reached upward, my fingertips brushing the darkest mark on the rough wood. They came away slicked with frigid condensation, like dew gathered from a glacier. A tremor cascaded down my spine. I recoiled, careful not to disturb the scene further. I was utterly alone down here, the heavy door bolted from within. No intruder could have passed unheard. How then could footprints materialize on the ceiling? The sheer illogic gnawed at me. My eyes darted, probing the gloom. Stacked boxes, a skeletal dresser, scattered tools, and leaning against the far wall, that tall, ornate mirror. Its tarnished silver frame writhed with baroque foliage, a relic coeval with the house itself. I recalled it from childhood, perpetually shrouded, relegated to obscurity. Now it stood bare, reflecting the lone bulb's wan eye. For an instant, my own distorted image stared back, fragmented by age spots and hairline cracks. Then a flicker behind me, like heat haze over asphalt. I spun around. Nothing. Only the prints, static and silent. Sleep that night was a tattered refuge. The unfamiliar mattress in the upstairs bedroom felt actively hostile. My imagination populated the space beneath the floorboards with sodden, scuffling sounds. Periodically, I'd bolt upright, breath held captive, listening. Morning found me descending the cellar steps with leaden reluctance. The footprints were there, but they had migrated. Now they tracked along the side wall, a vertical procession heading inexorably toward the mirror. A curse escaped my lips, my stomach twisting. I rasped a hand over my stubbled jaw, striving for rationality. Seepage, perhaps? Water tracing fissures, drying into suggestive patterns? But why these shapes? And why this constant, deliberate relocation? Kneeling, I examined them again, still moist, still radiating that unnatural cold. They seemed to beckon me toward the glass. Over the ensuing days, I forced a semblance of normality onto my work. Cartons were hauled upstairs, yellowed documents sorted, furniture marshaled for removal. Yet the cellar exerted a gravitational pull. Each morning brought a fresh configuration of the prints, clinging to a different beam, traversing the opposite wall, sometimes looping in bizarre, vertiginous spirals. Each time, they appeared freshly made, slick and glistening. Each time, that strange mineral scent thickened the air. And each time, the mirror snared my attention. I began noticing subtle aberrations in my reflection, a fractional delay in its mimicry, a slight skewing of perspective, as if the reality it held captive operated under different laws. On the fourth day, I resolved upon an experiment. I procured a thick polymer sheet and draped it meticulously over the mirror. For good measure, I hammered a nail into a nearby beam and hung a heavy, moth-eaten tapestry over the sheet. Then, sweeping the concrete floor with vigor, raising clouds of ancient dust, I tried to ignore the clammy tendrils of fear coiling up my arms. Locking the cellar door securely, I drove into town, errands providing a flimsy shield against the mounting dread, convinced this absurdity could be contained. Upon my return that evening, I discovered the tarp and tapestry crumpled in a corner, discarded with contemptuous ease. The footprints had reappeared on the ceiling, now tracing a frantic, zigzagging path, conveying an almost palpable frustration. My breath hitched, my heart hammered against my ribs, drowning out coherent thought. I flicked the overhead light off and on, a futile gesture. The mirror stood exposed, reflecting my rigid form at the foot of the stairs, a faint sheen of sweat purling on my brow. Every instinct screamed retreat. Flee this place, bolt the door, never look back. But the sale represented necessary funds, and I'd given Arthur my word. Besides, a corrosive curiosity had taken root, a desperate compulsion to understand. Was this communication? Were these impossible tracks a cipher I was meant to break? I began observing them with unnerving focus. Daily rearrangements yielded shapes that tantalized interpretation, arrows pointing toward the mirror, looping curves that induced nausea if stared at too long. I attempted sketches, diagrams, but my hands shook too violently, the patterns dissolving into meaningless squiggles on the page. My breathing grew shallow, accompanied by a prickling awareness at the nape of my neck, the feeling of unseen scrutiny. "What is it you want?" I whispered into the void one night, my voice cracking. The prints remained quiescent, dark stains gleaming on a rafter. Approaching the mirror, heart pounding, I posed the question again. Is there someone there? My reflection, pale and strained, offered no answer. But as I turned away, a peripheral flicker, a minute distortion, the reflection lagging, shifting a heartbeat after I did. By week's end, exhaustion had become my baseline state. A dull throb pulsed behind my eyes. My mouth tasted perpetually of old pennies. The house's ancient groans became personalized threats. I found myself avoiding the cellar, yet simultaneously drawn to it, compelled to check. One taut afternoon, I decided to inspect the mirror's reverse. Wrestling it away from the wall revealed something taped to the aged wooden backing, a photograph, faded and sepia-toned. It showed a figure standing in this very cellar, lantern held aloft. The face was an indistinct blur, but behind him, undeniably, faint impressions stained the walls. Decades old, surely. My stomach churned, wiping sweat from my brow, nausea rising, I understood. The patterns, the prints, they weren't novel. Someone else had borne witness. That tarnished glass, it was connected. A conduit? A window onto some inverted realm where gravity played by different rules and alien things crept upside down. That night, armed with a flashlight, I stood before the mirror again. The footprints formed a circle directly overhead. My pulse thundered, threatening unconsciousness. I stared into my reflection, slowly raising a hand. My mirror image dutifully complied. Leaning closer, my breath misted the glass. The mineral odor intensified, colder now. My throat constricted. I reached out, touching the surface. It felt frigid, unnaturally so. Pressing harder, I encountered a split second of resistance, not physical, but viscous, like pushing through unseen gelatin. Overhead, the footprints abruptly glistened brighter. Droplets formed at their edges, spattering cold moisture onto my shoulder. I jerked back, swiping at my neck with a trembling hand. Had I provoked it? Whatever it was? The flashlight beam wavered. My legs shook uncontrollably, sweat tracing icy paths down my spine. "Stop this," I pleaded, my voice thin and reedy. "Please." The prints remained. I risked another look into the mirror. Something was profoundly wrong. My reflection's eyes seemed hollowed, rimmed with shadow. The set of its mouth subtly warped, twisted into something not quite mine. I blinked fiercely. The reflection blinked too, but fractionally out of sync. That lag, undeniable now. A knot of ice formed in my gut. Stumbling backward, I nearly tripped over a pile of discarded ledgers. I couldn't remain. I had to escape the cellar, perhaps call someone, though who would credit such a tale? No tangible harm had occurred, yet my sanity felt perilously frayed. Drastic action was required. Gathering shreds of courage, I snatched the tapestry from the floor. My hands shook so violently I could barely grip the heavy fabric. My intent: cover the mirror, drag it from this house, cast it out. But as I reached forward, something glacial grazed my forearm, the phantom touch of an icy fingertip. Gasping, I recoiled, sweeping the flashlight beam wildly. Nothing, just myself and my silent, invisible tormentor. Before my eyes, the footprints began to shift, slithering like living ink across the timber, coalescing into a long, deliberate line stretching toward the corner where the mirror stood sentinel. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart threatening to burst. The choice was stark: flee now, abandon everything, or confront this presence. I thought of Arthur, my promise. I thought of the photograph, a warning perhaps, or a clue left by a predecessor trapped in this same nightmare. Teeth clenched against the rising panic, I lunged, throwing the heavy tapestry over the mirror. The fabric clung. I pressed my palm flat against it, holding it fast. The cellar air plunged colder, chilling me to the bone. A distinct rattling emanated from beneath my hand, as if something on the other side of the glass scrabbled, desperate to push through. My vision blurred with involuntary tears. I pressed harder, mouthing silent prayers for cessation. Then, abruptly, silence. The vibration ceased. The profound chill lessened fractionally. Stepping back, trembling violently, tears streaming down my face, I saw the footprints remained on the ceiling. Dark patches of moisture, yes, but unmoving. Subdued, perhaps, for now. I fled the cellar, locking the door behind me, my legs barely supporting my weight. Sleep that night was shallow, punctuated by the house's ancient sighs and whispers. In the morning, a thin film of condensation lay pooled beneath the cellar door, as if something cold and patient breathed on the other side. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked gaunt, hollow-eyed, and I could swear, just for a terrifying instant, that my eyes held a subtle darkness, a hint of that same out-of-sync quality I'd witnessed in the cellar glass. I am packing now. The decision is made. This house remains uncleansed, my promise to Arthur broken. I cannot sell it. Who would knowingly purchase such insidious real estate? As I pass the stairwell leading down, I hear it, a faint, rhythmic drip, drip, drip. I know, with chilling certainty, that if I were to open that door, new patterns would adorn the walls, the ceiling, impossible trails, perhaps even handprints now. I know the mirror waits, shrouded but never truly neutralized. Before I leave, I glance one last time into a small, innocuous mirror in the entrance hall. Just for a fleeting second, my reflection seems angled differently, its head tilted as if listening to secrets I cannot perceive. My stomach clenches tight. Licking dry lips, I don't linger. I know what resides here. The peril isn't vanquished, it merely waits. And I fear that henceforth, every reflective surface might hold a hidden threat, a glimpse of those damp prints materializing behind me. The memory of an icy touch forever lingering at my shoulder. Should I ever be foolish enough to return, I know I'll find that old cellar mirror waiting, its hidden world poised, eager to bleed into mine. My torch beam sliced the velvet dark, a nervous tremor already humming in my gut as I began my rounds through the necropolis. Unease had been my shadow since discovering it, a squat stone edifice huddled at the property's fringe, an anomaly absent from any brittle map or ledger in the archives. Ignore it, the ground supervisor had grunted, counsel that chafed against my diligence. I am the custodian of this slumbering city, its every shadowed corner my domain. The primary avenues gleam under lamps, manicured and familiar, but beyond them lies a tangle of gnarled roots and tilted earth, a place the tidy maps forget. It was there, amidst the leaning stones and whispering cypresses, that the structure first loomed, like a mausoleum, yet subtly wrong. Its roof possessed a shallow, unsettling curve. Its doors seemed forged of denser, more secretive metal than the others. No mourner ever strayed near, no faded nameplate claimed its granite face. Fear is not a familiar companion. Years I've walked these historical grounds, my duties a rhythm of mundane care, sweeping leaf-strewn paths, pruning encroaching ivy, patrolling the perimeter fence against nocturnal trespassers, noting time's patient vandalism on stone angels. Most shifts pass in a tranquil hush, punctuated only by the cemetery's inherent quirks, the groan of an ancient gate, hinge yielding to unseen forces, the furtive rustle in the undergrowth, wind and wandering fauna, common explanations that rarely quickened my pulse, until this structure bled into my routine. The first time I skirted its perimeter, a whisper of sound snagged my attention, tightening the muscles along my spine. A distant radio, perhaps, drifting from the living world beyond the walls? No, the notes were too crystalline, too deliberate, the distinct chime of piano keys. I extinguished my torch and held my breath captive in my chest. Silence flooded back. A moment passed, then I cast the beam onto the door, locked fast. Its surface was a tapestry of deep, ossified rust. Squinting, I tried to pierce the gloom through a sliver near the lintel, but the interior remained an inscrutable darkness. Imagination, I told myself, shrugging off the phantom melody as I continued my patrol. Sunlight the next day found me hunched over the cemetery's chronicles in the small gatehouse office. This place breathed history through its aged paper, brittle folders, ink-scrawled annotations, typewritten accounts yellowed by decades. During my midday respite, I sifted through them, seeking mention of this architectural outlier, crypts of esteemed lineages, mausoleums meticulously documented, yes, but nothing echoing that peculiar form, that specific location. Expansion plans and renovation notes from bygone eras offered no clues. The omission gnawed at me, a discordant note in the cemetery's recorded symphony, yet speculation felt premature. A forgotten private vault, perhaps, lost to bureaucratic oversight. That evening, deliberately, I charted a course away from the anomaly, a residue of the previous night's strangeness clinging to me. The moon remained veiled, amplifying the darkness until it felt viscous, heavy. My flashlight beam swept methodically across the legions of headstones nestled amongst the trees. Yet as my path inevitably drew nearer the structure's vicinity, the piano music returned. Louder this time, achingly clear. A slow, deliberate melody unfurled, each note resonating with melancholic precision. My heart kicked against my ribs. A clammy dampness bloomed on my palms. My mouth went dry as dust. Calm, I commanded myself, though a betraying tremor ran through the hand gripping the torch. I stood utterly still, listening. The music flowed without flaw, seamless, imbued with the grace of long practice. Reason insisted the structure was sealed, lifeless, yet the sound was undeniable. Compelled, I approached the heavy door. Pressing my ear to the cold stone, the piano felt closer, intimate, as if I stood beside the player on an unseen bench. I tested the handle, immovable. The lock felt anciently stubborn. I rapped my knuckles against the dense wood. Instantly, the music ceased. "Hello?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the sudden profound silence. "Is anyone there?" Nothing. Only the faint sigh of the night breeze through the leaves. A chill traced its way down my neck, settling between my shoulder blades. I scanned the surrounding darkness, no other source for the sound. Pulling out my mobile, I glanced at the screen. No signal, predictably weak in this secluded corner. What had I intended? To call whom? A nervous energy thrummed beneath my skin, a feeling of trespass. Retreat seemed the wisest course. I turned, finished my rounds under a newly watchful sky. Morning light stripped the structure of its nocturnal menace, revealing it as merely weathered stone, gray walls, a roof of fractured, time-worn tiles. Near the apex, an inscription eroded into illegibility. Again, I tried the door. Again, it held fast. Circling the perimeter, I discovered a small window on the far side, guarded by stout iron bars. The glass behind them was thick with grime, obscuring the interior. My flashlight beam, angled poorly, reflected back, revealing only deeper shadow within. The urge to pry at the bars surfaced, but I quelled it, lacking the tools and the authority to inflict damage. That afternoon, determination renewed, I plunged back into the archives, venturing into the dust-choked storage room. I wrestled with stiff cardboard boxes, releasing the scent of decaying paper as I disturbed brittle folders. Records of interments from a century past emerged, handwritten ledgers detailing plots, patrons, perpetual care fees, yet none illuminated the mystery crypt. As frustration began to set in, a small, unlabeled notebook had tumbled from a teetering stack. Inside, crude sketches mapped portions of the cemetery grounds, likely the jottings of a long-dead caretaker planning repairs. On the final leaf, a familiar shape materialized, a rough rendering of the very structure that haunted my thoughts. Beside it, a hasty scribble. Odd addition, not on official list. No date, no signature, just that. A jolt went through me, a flicker of vindication. I wasn't the first to notice. When dusk deepened into my evening shift, the spectral melody greeted me for the third time, the same languid theme circling back on itself, hypnotic. This time, mere knocking felt insufficient. I played my flashlight along the door's edges, searching for hidden mechanisms, infinitesimal gaps. The piano continued, unperturbed. My breath grew shallow, quickening in my tight chest. The perfection of the notes felt alien, impossible. This cannot be happening. The thought hammered against my reason. The building stood derelict, lightless, windowless. How could a piano even reside within, let alone be played? I braced my shoulder against the door, pushed. It yielded nothing, solid as bedrock. Frustration surged. I balled my fist and struck the wood sharply twice. The music fractured, then died. Silence rushed in, ringing in my ears. Then, from within, a faint scuff, like polished wood shifting on stone. I froze, every nerve alight. "Who's there?" I whispered into the void. Silence answered, and then, after a taut pause, the melody resumed, note for deliberate note. Cold sweat slicked my palms. I wiped them uselessly on my trousers. I backed away, the fine hairs on my arms erect. Unease curdled into something closer to dread as I retreated. Later, sleep offered no escape, only a distorted reflection. I dreamt I stood inside the crypt, my flashlight beam illuminating an upright piano. Sheet music lay scattered atop it, and there, scrawled in the margins, was my own name, Elias. I awoke with a gasp, forehead damp with sweat. A dream, I insisted, but its chill lingered through the morning hours. My next shift arrived under the weight of obsession. Tucked into my tool bag, nestled amongst wrenches and screwdrivers, was a crowbar. As midnight painted the cemetery in its deepest hues, the grounds utterly still, I walked with purpose towards the anomalous crypt. The music began before I reached it, the familiar, haunting refrain weaving through the trees. My pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Sweat traced cold paths down my back, my throat constricted. My grip tightened on the cold steel of the crowbar. Reaching the door, I placed my flashlight on the damp earth, its beam pointing upwards. I jammed the tip of the crowbar into the seam between door and frame. Leaning into it, I heaved. Metal shrieked in protest. My muscles screamed with the strain, my arm trembling. Inside, the piano played on, its tempo unwavering. I threw my weight into it again. A sharp crack echoed, and the ancient lock yielded. The door groaned open a few inches. A soft pop, and then absolute silence. The piano was still. Holding my breath, I pushed the door wider, sweeping the flashlight's beam into the aperture. The air met me thick and stagnant, redolent of decades undisturbed. Dust motes danced like phantoms in the light. My nostrils prickled. Stone walls enclosed a small square space, and there, in the center, draped in a time-stained frayed sheet, stood an upright piano. I stepped across the threshold, the beam probing the corners. Empty, utterly empty. Just the piano, and in one corner, a small wooden table burdened with a stack of yellowed papers. My hand trembled slightly as I approached the table. My mouth felt parched. A primal part of me braced for sudden movement, a figure lunging from the shadows behind the piano. Nothing stirred. I lifted the topmost sheet. The script was archaic, faded, musical notation sprawled across the page, and there, penned clearly in the margin, Elias. The date at the top read 1920, a century ago. My heart had slammed against my sternum. I scanned the accompanying text, references to a caretaker. Then my surname, spelled without error. It described small, intimate details, the color of my hair, my approximate height, the nature of my duties. It even named the specific brand of flashlight I carried. Nausea churned in my stomach. I shuffled through the other papers, more of the same. Crude sketches of the cemetery grounds, annotated with my nightly patrol routes, details about the very jeans and boots I wore. I swallowed, the sound loud in the stillness. My breath came in ragged bursts. My skin felt clammy. I stood reeling, trying to reconcile the impossible. The scent of aged paper and damp stone filled the air. A faint, rhythmic dripping sounded from a corner, likely groundwater seeping through the ancient mortar. The piano stood silent sentinel. Hesitantly, I lifted the dusty sheet. Beneath, the wood gleamed impossibly pristine. Gently, I depressed a single ivory key. The note sang out, pure and resonant, the exact tone I had heard through the stone. A spike of raw anxiety shot through me. My eyes darted around the small chamber, searching for hidden speakers, wires, any rational explanation. Nothing. Beneath the stack of sheet music, I noticed a smaller, leather-bound notebook. I slid it free. The cover was cracked and brittle. Inside, more of the same meticulous handwriting, pages filled with brief entries, logging the caretaker's passage. Elias passed at 23:13, torch held in left hand. My exact route, noted with chilling precision. The final entry read, "He will open the door soon. He will see these pages. He will wonder how this is possible. He must keep this place safe." Comprehension remained elusive. My breathing grew heavier, my heart pounding a frantic tattoo against my throat. My legs felt unsteady. I swept the flashlight beam across the stark interior again. Bare stone walls, no chairs, no benches, No sign of human habitation save the piano and its cryptic papers. Had I stumbled into an elaborate century-old prank? But the details, my flashlight, my clothes, were too current, too specific. A strange reluctance stayed my hand from gathering the papers, from seeking validation from my supervisor. Forcing a semblance of calm, I raised my phone, capturing several photographs. The flash momentarily bleached the room, revealing faint, intricate carvings on the walls, perhaps random scoring, perhaps nascent musical bars. Hard to discern. Wiping sweat from my brow, my body remained coiled, ready for flight. One last inspection of the piano. I lifted the lid covering the strings and hammers. Everything appeared immaculate, perfectly functional. No dust marred the felt hammers. It looked maintained. The thought was absurd. Who maintained a piano in a phantom crypt? Who acted as caretaker for a tomb officially non-existent? I touched a few more keys. The notes hung in the air, clear and resonant. My skin prickled. Stepping back, breathing heavily through my mouth, I knew I couldn't remain. The feeling of being observed despite the profound emptiness was overwhelming. I backed out into the night air. The cool darkness struck my face like a physical blow. I exhaled, a ragged gasp. My hands were shaking violently now. I pulled the door shut, jamming the broken lock mechanism back into place as best I could. Then I turned and hurried, almost ran, back towards the reassuring lights of the main path, my mind a chaotic whirl of unanswerable questions. How could my name, my life, be documented 100 years before my birth? What explained the music? The slow, persistent melody echoed in my head, refusing to fade. Back in the small office, I sat before the incident report form, the cursor blinking on the blank screen. I typed a sterile account. Unlisted structure located. Appeared to be old crypt containing antique furniture. Door lock found damaged, temporarily secured. I omitted the papers, my name, the impossible music. Staring at the empty fields demanding detail, my stomach clenched. A headache began to pulse behind my eyes. I saved the incomplete report, closing the file without sending it. Who would possibly believe the truth? I still walk these grounds. Every night, my route takes me near that stone anomaly. Sometimes, faintly, the piano music drifts on the air. Other nights, only silence emanates from within. I haven't crossed its threshold again, but I think of it constantly. The image of my name on those ancient pages is seared into my memory. Logic insists on a rational explanation, yet none presents itself. Each time I pass the structure, I feel my pulse quicken, the phantom melody stirring in the recesses of my mind. Is the piano still draped in its shroud? Are the papers still resting on the small table? Has anything new been written? I've spoken of this to no one. My supervisor asks no questions. I offer no information beyond the routine. My torch beam stays fixed ahead when I patrol that benighted corner. Yet sometimes my gaze drifts towards that weathered door, and I remember the music, how it ceased at my knock. The tension resides permanently in my chest now, a cold knot tightening whenever the building slides into my peripheral vision. Answers elude me. No neat conclusion ties off the ragged edges of this experience. I only know the indelible images, the impossible date, the handwriting that knew me. the flawless music from unseen hands, the profound hush that fell the moment I breached the door. I cannot forget the sheer wrongness of standing alone in that dusty space, the only sound the echo of my own ragged breath. That is my burden. That is what keeps the edge in my step as I walk the cemetery's shadowed paths. I do my job. I try not to linger near the back. But sometimes, carried on the night wind, I swear I hear it. The ghost of a melody, drifting from behind a heavy stone door that has no right to exist.